The scalp are layers of soft tissues that cover the cranial vault. The scalp is an anatomical region that is bordered anteriorly by the face, laterally by the neck, and posteriorly by the neck. The scalp extends anteriorly to the eyebrows or the superciliary arches, and it extends posteriorly to the superior nuchal line. The scalp also extends laterally to the superior temporal line. From a cosmetic perspective, the scalp provides a surface for hair growth, and from a physical sense, it serves as a protective barrier, safeguarding the body from external damage and discomfort. The scalp has 5 layers, and we usually use the mnemonic scalp for arrangement of these layers from superficial to deep. The most superficial layer is the skin. The second layer is the dense connective tissue. It is also called the superficial fascia. The third layer is the aponeurotic layer or epicranial aponeurosis. The fourth layer is the loose areolar connective tissue. And then lastly, the pericranium. We are going to go through these layers one by one. So we shall go from superficial to deep. The skin of the scalp is thick and hairy except in the forehead. The skin is firmly adherent to the epicranial aponeurosis by this dense connective tissue. It has numerous hair follicles, sebaceous glands, and sweat glands. The skin of the scalp is a common site for sebaceous cysts, and this is because of the numerous sebaceous glands that are located in the skin of the scalp. The dense connective tissue. The dense connective tissue connects the skin to the epicranial aponeurosis. The dense connective tissue is highly vascularized and innervated. The walls of the blood vessels are adherent to the fibrous connective tissue in this layer, and this puts the blood vessels at risk of getting torn or getting cut during injury. These blood vessels are not usually able to constrict or retract after injury, and this leads to profuse bleeding. The bleeding is usually stopped by pressing the vessel against the underlying bone. The epicranial aponeurosis, also known as Galea aponeurotica, this is a thin tendon-like structure that connects the occipitalis and frontalis muscles. The epicranial aponeurosis is usually under tension in the anteroposterior direction by the tone of occipital frontalis muscle. This tension prevents gaping of the scalp wound unless the aponeurotic layer is cut transversely. The loose areolar connective tissue. This layer separates the epicranial aponeurosis from the pericranium. It is made up of loose areolar tissue and it has numerous blood vessels. The layer is also traversed by emissary veins that are coming from the second layer. The pericranium. This is formed by the periosteum of the bones of the vault of the skull. It is loosely attached to the bones and it can be easily stripped off, except at the sutures, where it is firmly attached to the structural membrane, and it becomes continuous with endosteum. The occipitofrontalis muscle has the frontal bellies and posterior bellies. The frontal bellies originate from the skin and subcutaneous tissue that overlie the eyebrows or the superciliary arch. It also originates from the root of the nose. The frontal bellies of occipitofrontalis move posteriorly and insert on the epicranial aponeurosis in front of the coronal suture. The occipital bellies of occipitofrontalis muscle originate from the lateral two-thirds of the superior nuchal line, and they move anteriorly and insert on the epicranial aponeurosis. Nerve supply of occipitofrontalis muscle. The frontal bellies are supplied by the temporal branch of facial nerve. The occipital bellies are supplied by the posterior auricular branch of facial nerve. Actions of occipitofrontalis muscle. Alternate contraction of the occipital bellies and the frontal bellies move the scalp forwards and backwards over the vault. The frontal bellies of occipitofrontalis move the eyebrows upwards, for example, during surprise. The central part of the frontal bellies produce transverse wrinkles on the forehead, for example, in fright. Sensory innervation of the scalp. We have 8 sensory nerves supplying the scalp. We have 4 sensory nerves anterior to the auricle and 4 sensory nerves posterior to the auricle. The nerves in front of the auricle are derived from the trigeminal nerve, and the nerves posterior to the auricle are derived from the second and third cervical nerves. So anterior to the auricle, we have the supratrochlear nerve, which arises from the ophthalmic division of trigeminal. The second one is supraorbital nerve, which is a branch of frontal nerve from the ophthalmic division of trigeminal. The third sensory nerve is zygomaticotemporal nerve, which is a branch of zygomatic nerve from the maxillary division of trigeminal nerve. The fourth sensory nerve anterior to the auricle is auriculotemporal nerve. It is a branch of the mandibular division of trigeminal. Posterior to the auricle, we have the great auricular nerve, which is derived from the ventral rami of second and third cervical nerves. Next, we have the lesser occipital nerve, which is derived from the ventral ramus of the second cervical nerve. Then we have the greater occipital nerve, which is derived from the dorsal ramus of the second cervical nerve. Lastly, we have the third occipital nerve, which is derived from the dorsal ramus of the third cervical nerve. The blood supply of the scalp. Each half of the scalp is supplied by 5 arteries. We have 3 arteries anterior to the auricle and 2 arteries posterior to the auricle. The supratrochlear artery is a branch of ophthalmic artery from the internal carotid artery. It enters the scalp around the supraorbital margin, which is about 2 centimeters lateral to the midline. We have the supraorbital artery, which is also a branch of ophthalmic artery from the internal carotid artery. It enters the scalp through the supraorbital notch about 2 to 3 centimeters lateral to the supratrochlear artery. The last artery that is anterior to the auricle is the superficial temporal artery. This artery is the terminal branch of external carotid artery, and it enters the scalp in front of the root of the zygoma, and there it divides into the anterior and posterior branches. Posterior to the auricle, we have the posterior auricular artery, which is a branch of the external carotid artery. This artery enters the scalp behind the root of the ear. Lastly, we have the occipital artery, which is a branch of the external carotid artery. This artery enters the scalp midway between the external occipital protuberance and the ear. This is a cadaveric image showing us some of the neurovasculature of the scalp. So this is the superficial temporal artery, and these are some of the branches of the superficial temporal artery. Here we have the supraorbital artery, and then we have here the supraorbital nerve. Here we also have the occipital nerve and the occipital artery. The arteries on one side of the scalp can freely anastomose with one another, and we also find anastomosis between those on one half with the other half. This anastomosis makes the scalp a site for potential collateral circulation, and this collateral circulation is between the external carotid artery and the internal carotid artery. The scalp is drained by 5 veins on each half of the scalp. The veins usually accompany arteries, and this makes them have similar names. We have 3 veins anterior to the auricle and 2 veins posterior to the auricle. We have the supratrochlear vein and the supraorbital vein. These 2 veins drain the scalp, and they join each other to form the angular vein. The angular vein moves downwards and becomes the facial vein. We also have the superficial temporal vein, which descends anterior to the tragus, and it enters the parotid gland. In the parotid gland, the superficial temporal vein joins with the maxillary vein to form the retromandibular vein. We have the posterior auricular vein, which runs posterior to the auricle and it unites with the posterior division of retromandibular. When the two unite, they form the external jugular vein that is going to drain into the subclavian vein. Lastly, we have the occipital vein. It is not indicated here. The occipital vein is going to drain into the suboccipital venous plexuses.